Marry the fat one, papa. The fat bride was mocked until Mountain Man's daughter called her Mom. Marry the fat one, papa. The words rang out sharp and clear across the crowded town square of Silver Creek. Men burst into laughter, boots stomping against the dusty boards of the auction platform. Women covered their mouths with whispers. And standing under the scorching spring sun of 1878, Abigail Foster felt her heart shrivel with shame. She was the only one left. Out of the 5 mail-order brides shipped west from Boston, 4 had already been chosen, claimed like cattle by miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers eager for wives. But Abigail, 26 and heavy-set with soft, round cheeks and a figure weighing nearly 250 pounds, remained unwanted. The jeers cut deep. Look at her, built like an ox. No man wants to feed a cow that size. She'd crush him before the wedding night. Abby's throat burned as if filled with dust. Her eyes darted toward the church steeple, wishing she could vanish into the clouds. But instead, she stood rooted to the auction block, exposed to every cruel grin. She had dreamed that maybe, just maybe, someone would look past her size and see her heart. But in this moment, she was nothing more than a spectacle. And then it happened. A small figure broke through the crowd, a little girl, no more than 8, her hair a tangled mess of golden strands. She clutched Abby's hand with surprising strength and looked out at the crowd with fearless blue eyes. "Papa," she cried again, voice ringing like a bell, "marry this one. She has kind eyes, like Mama did." Silence fell. The crowd parted. From the back stepped a tall, broad man with weather-worn skin and eyes like the stormy mountains. Jeremiah Morrison, known simply as Jeb, locked eyes with his daughter, then with Abigail, and in that instant the laughter died. Abigail Foster had never meant to end up here on a raised platform in the middle of a frontier town, stripped of dignity and waiting for someone to claim her as though she were no more than livestock. Back in Boston, she had once been the quiet daughter of a merchant, known for her needlework and her gentle spirit. But after her parents died, her only surviving brother had squandered what little inheritance remained, leaving her no choice but to sign her name to the marriage agency contract. The agency promised new beginnings, respectable men, a roof over her head, perhaps even the possibility of children. Abigail had clung to that promise during the long train ride west. But now, under the unforgiving Colorado sun, the dream was withering like parchment left too close to fire. Her gown, plain cotton patched at the hem, clung awkwardly to her full form. Where the other women stood in stiff silks and lace, she looked shabby, provincial, and out of place. She could feel the judgment in every sideways glance, every smirk curling from the lips of the onlookers. Too fat to cook, too fat to clean, a ranch hand snorted, loud enough for all to hear. She'd eat more than the cattle, another added, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Abigail kept her eyes lowered, hands twisting at her apron until her knuckles burned white. She would not let them see her cry. If there was one thing the years had taught her, it was that tears only fueled cruelty. But the auctioneer, a red-faced sheriff with a voice like a cracking whip, had no mercy. "Gentlemen, this here is the last of our fine brides. Strong arms, plenty of cushion." His words drew a wave of raucous laughter. "Who'll take her? Who'll offer anything at all?" The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. No hands went up, no bids called. Abigail's heart thudded painfully. To be rejected so openly in front of the whole town, was worse than death. Then came the child. Emma Morrison's small fingers slipped into hers, warm, insistent, real. The girl's gaze was direct, unashamed, and full of something Abigail hadn't felt in years: recognition. "Papa, this one," Emma repeated, her little chin lifting with defiance. "She looks kind. I want her." A murmur rippled through the square. All eyes turned to the tall man emerging from the shadows of the saloon's porch. Jeremiah Morrison was known to most as a recluse, a mountain man who came down only to trade furs or lumber, his rifle always slung across his back. His wife had died 2 winters ago, and since then he had spoken to few, if any. Now he stood at the edge of the platform, broad shoulders filling the silence. His weathered face betrayed no amusement, no mockery, only the measured stillness of a man weighing a choice. The sheriff barked a laugh. "What's this, Morrison? Your little girl picks your wife for you?" But Jeb didn't answer the sheriff. His eyes lingered instead on Abigail. The roundness of her face, the raw humiliation she tried so desperately to hide, the way she still stood tall despite the cruelty. He stepped forward, boots striking the boards with quiet certainty. "I'll take her," he said simply. Gasps rose from the crowd. The sheriff nearly dropped his gavel. "You mean you'll marry the fat one?" Jeremiah's jaw tightened, his hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. "I said I'll take her. Today." And just like that, Abigail's fate was sealed, not as the town's laughingstock, but as the chosen bride of the man who dared silence their scorn. The church bells rang before sunset, their hollow chimes echoing across Silver Creek as if mocking how hastily the vows had been spoken. There had been no flowers, no music, only a trembling Abigail in her patched dress and Jeremiah Morrison in the same black coat he had worn at his wife's funeral 2 years before. Emma clutched both their hands, beaming as though it were the grandest wedding in the world. By nightfall, the town faded into darkness behind them. The wagon creaked as Jeb urged the mule along the rocky trail that led toward the mountains. Abigail sat beside Emma on the wooden bench, her eyes darting between the jagged silhouettes of the peaks and the quiet, unreadable man at the reins. The air grew colder with each mile. Pines crowded the road, their branches whispering above like the murmurs of ghosts. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, and Abby shivered beneath her shawl. She was a city-born woman, accustomed to the sound of carriages and church bells, not wilderness that seemed vast enough to swallow her whole. Emma leaned into her, small fingers curling into the folds of Abby's skirt. "Don't be afraid," the girl whispered. "Papa knows the way." Abby's heart softened. She wrapped her arm around the child, letting warmth flow where words could not. For the first time that day, she felt more than humiliation. She felt needed. Jeb said little. Only once, when he noticed Abby's teeth chattering, did he break the silence. He tugged a thick woolen blanket from behind the seat and handed it to her without a word. Their hands brushed briefly, and Abigail was startled by the heat of his calloused palm. She muttered a quiet thank you, but Jeb only nodded, eyes fixed on the trail. Hours passed. The mule stumbled on loose stones, the wheels groaned, and Abby feared the wagon might splinter apart. But Jeb guided the animal with calm authority, every movement measured, as though the mountain itself bowed to his will. She found herself watching him from the corner of her eye, the strength in his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his breathing. He was not handsome in the polished way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something solid about him, something that felt like safety. At midnight, they stopped near a clearing, where a small creek gurgled between rocks glazed with frost. Jeb lifted Emma down first, then offered his hand to Abby. For a moment, she hesitated. No man had offered her his hand in years, not since before the whispers and the mocking laughter had hardened her heart. Slowly, she placed her fingers in his. He steadied her with ease, as though her weight were nothing to him at all. Jeb set about building a fire with quiet efficiency. Sparks leapt into the night as he struck steel against flint, until finally flames licked at the wood. He laid out a tin pot, filled it with water from the creek, and tossed in dried venison and barley. The scent of simmering stew soon mingled with the cold mountain air. Abby sat cross-legged beside Emma, watching him. Something about the firelight softened the hard lines of his face. He moved without hesitation, as though he had done this ritual 1,000 times, and perhaps he had. Yet, when he passed her a wooden bowl brimming with hot stew, he waited until she had taken the first spoonful before serving himself. The gesture, small as it was, made her throat tighten. No one had ever put her before themselves, not even her family. "Good?" His voice was low, gravelly, startling her from her thoughts. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with honesty. "It's very good." Jeb gave a brief nod, then lowered his gaze back to his bowl. But Emma leaned into Abby's side, cheeks flushed with warmth, and whispered, "Mama used to cook like this, but I like it better with you here." Tears pricked at Abby's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. In that moment, she realized the girl wasn't only clinging to her out of need, she was giving something too: acceptance. The wilderness around them was vast and merciless, but here, by the crackle of fire and the gentle presence of a little girl, Abigail felt a flicker of something she had not dared to believe in for years: belonging. The trail wound upward for another day and a half before the mountains finally opened into a valley. There, nestled against a backdrop of towering pines and granite cliffs, stood the Morrison cabin. It wasn't grand. 2 rooms with rough-hewn walls, a stone chimney, and a sloping roof patched with pine shingles, but smoke curled warmly from the chimney, and Abby felt a strange tug in her chest. "This is home now," she thought, though the word seemed almost too heavy to hold. Inside, the cabin was plain but sturdy. A wood-burning stove took center place in the combined kitchen and sitting room. A heavy oak table scarred with knife marks sat near the window, and in the corner stood a pair of narrow beds covered with woolen quilts. The floor creaked underfoot, and every wall smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Abby moved cautiously at first, uncertain of her place, but Emma tugged her by the hand and pulled her to the table as though she had always belonged there. Jeb watched silently from the doorway, his hat in his hand, as Emma proudly announced, "This is Mama Abby's chair." The name made Abby's cheeks flush. She looked to Jeb, expecting a correction, but he only hung his hat on the peg and said nothing. The days fell into rhythm. Each morning, Jeb rose before dawn to chop wood or check his traps. Emma trailed after him, eager to learn, but always returned before noon to sit with Abby by the fire. Together, Abby taught her letters, sounding out words in a worn Bible. She stitched dolls from scraps of cloth and even made a ragged little apron so Emma could help stir pots at the stove. Cooking became Abby's first gift to this household. She kneaded bread with careful hands, flavored soups with dried herbs, and discovered that Jeb's stoic expression softened ever so slightly after each meal. He said little, but the way he cleared his bowl, wiped his beard, and gave a small nod was enough to let her know she had pleased him. One afternoon, while Jeb was repairing the fence, Abby stepped outside carrying a pitcher of water. She paused at the sight of him, lifting heavy rails alone. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, the muscles in his arms flexing as he drove nails into timber. She hesitated, heart pounding with a nervous courage. "May I help?" she asked. He turned, brow furrowing. "It's heavy work." "I'm heavier than most," she replied with a faint smile, surprising herself. Something flickered in his eyes, not laughter, not pity, but a quiet respect. He handed her a smaller hammer and showed her where to strike. Her arms ached with each blow, but Jeb steadied her wrist, guiding her grip until the nails slid flush into the wood. By the time they finished, her palms were blistered and her dress speckled with dirt. Yet for the first time in years, Abby felt strong. That evening, Jeb placed an extra log on the fire before she could rise from her chair. "So, you can keep warm," he said simply. It was a small gesture, but it lodged deep in her heart. Nights in the cabin carried their own music, the whistle of wind through pine needles, the crackle of firewood, Emma's soft breathing from her loft above. Abby often lay awake, staring at the rafters, wondering if she was truly a wife or just a placeholder for Emma's longing. Jeb was courteous, careful, and respectful. He never pressed closer than she was ready for. Yet sometimes, in the quiet glow of the hearth, she caught him watching her, not with desire alone, but with something steadier, something she had long thought was not meant for her. One evening, after she had spent the day sweeping the floor and scrubbing pots, Jeb returned with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently in front of her. "For you?" he said gruffly. She unfolded the cloth to reveal skeins of brightly dyed yarn and a set of needles. Her breath caught. "But how?" "Traded pelts in town," he said. "Emma told me you missed sewing." Abby's throat tightened. Few men ever noticed the little pieces of a woman's heart, let alone cared enough to return them. She reached out, fingers trembling, and for a moment her hand brushed his. He didn't pull away. In that cabin, through chores, through laughter with Emma, through silent kindnesses exchanged across the dinner table, Abigail began to find something she had thought lost forever. Not romance spun from novels, but trust, a slow, steady blooming of hope. And Jeb, though he said little, carried his own quiet revelation each time he watched her move about his home. The cabin no longer felt like a place of mourning. With Abby's voice humming lullabies in the kitchen and Emma's giggles filling the rafters, it had become something else entirely, a family. For a time, life in the mountains seemed steady, almost peaceful. But the frontier has a way of testing every bond, and shadows from the past are never far behind. It began with whispers in town. Whenever Jeb rode down with furs or lumber, Abigail accompanied him to help choose flour, salt, and kerosene. The townsfolk never missed their chance to sneer. "There goes Morrison and his fat bride," a shopkeeper muttered once, loud enough for Abigail to hear. "She married him to eat his supplies, no doubt," another woman hissed. Abby held her head high, but inside each word landed like a stone. She tried to ignore them, but when she caught sight of Emma glaring fiercely at the whispers, she felt guilt. She never wanted the child to inherit her shame. Jeb, however, was different. He stood taller when the words came, his hand resting firmly on the small of Abby's back as if to shield her from every cruel eye. "Let 'em talk," he said once as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "Their mouths are their only weapons, and I've got plenty more." Still, the murmurs grew, and with them an even darker presence returned. One evening, as Abby and Emma were preparing supper, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, broad-shouldered, sharply dressed in Eastern fashion, but with eyes that burned with spite. Abigail froze, the ladle slipping from her hands. "Marcus," she whispered, "her brother." He strode forward with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him something. "So it's true," he sneered, looking her up and down. "My sister ran off and sold herself to some mountain brute. How fitting." Jeb stepped out from the barn, axe still in hand, his expression granite. "State your business." Marcus smirked. "Family business. Abby owes me $500, her share of Father's estate. She thought she could walk away, but debts don't vanish. Not in Boston, and certainly not here." Abby's heart sank. She had left Boston with nothing, glad to escape the tangled web of Marcus's gambling debts and cruelty. She never thought he'd chase her west. "I owe you nothing," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I signed away my inheritance when I left. You know that." Marcus's smile turned venomous. "The papers were never filed. Legally, you're still tied to the estate, which means you'll pay what you owe, or I'll drag you back myself." Emma, small but fierce, stepped in front of Abby. "You can't take Mama Abby," she cried, fists balled. "She's ours." Marcus laughed cruelly. "Out of the mouths of babes. This farce of a marriage won't hold up in court either. No family consent, no dowry, barely more than a tavern trick." Jeb moved then, placing his hand on Emma's shoulder, drawing her back behind him. His voice was low, steady, and dangerous. "She is my wife, and she is this child's mother. You'll not take her from us." But Marcus wasn't alone. The following week, word came that he had hired a pair of rough men, drifters, with nothing to lose. One night, their shadows crept near the cabin, voices low, intent, clear. Abby woke to the sound of a window rattling, her breath caught in her throat. Before fear could paralyze her, Jeb was already moving. He pulled the rifle from its stand by the door, his body tense with the calm readiness of a man who had faced danger before. Later, she would learn he had once worn Union blue, fought at Shiloh, and lost more than comrades to the war. "Stay with Emma," he ordered, but Abby found herself gripping the iron poker, heart pounding. For years, she had been the one to shrink, to hide. Not tonight. Not when this family, her family, was at risk. When the men broke through the porch, Jeb met them with the rifle raised. His voice thundered through the cabin walls. "Step 1 foot closer, and I'll put you both in the ground." In that instant, Abby realized the past had come calling, and this time she would not let it steal what she had found in the mountains. The night air was bitter cold, but the tension was hotter than any fire. 2 men stood on the porch, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlight, while Marcus lingered behind them with a smug grin. "Bring her out, Morrison," one of the men barked. "We ain't here to hurt the girl, just the fat one." Inside, Abigail clutched the poker with white knuckles. Emma whimpered, pressing her face against Abby's skirts. Shame threatened to rise again, but this time it met steel. She would not let them take her, not now, not ever. Jeb opened the cabin door with deliberate calm, rifle steady against his shoulder. His voice carried like thunder rolling across the mountains. You'll take nothing from this house, not while I draw breath." The first thug laughed, stepping forward. "Big words, but there's two of us, and you've only got one shot before we're on you." Abby felt her chest tighten. She saw Jeb's hand firm, steady, but also knew the risk was real. Without thinking, she stepped up beside him, poker raised high. Her voice, though trembling, rang clear. "Then you'll have to come through both of us." For the first time, the men hesitated. Perhaps they had expected a weeping, cowering woman. Instead, they found a wife who stood shoulder to shoulder with her husband. Marcus snarled, frustration breaking through his arrogance. "She's mine. She owes me, and I'll see her dragged back if I have to burn this place to the ground." That was his mistake, because in that very moment, the pounding of hooves thundered up the trail. Sheriff Johnson and 3 townsmen arrived, rifles glinting. The sheriff dismounted with a scowl. "Enough of this, Marcus. You've stirred trouble one time too many." The hired men faltered, backing away as the sheriff raised his weapon. Within minutes, they were disarmed and bound. Marcus shouted curses, but his words carried no weight as he too was dragged forward, wrists tied. "You'll answer for attempted kidnapping and threats of violence," the sheriff said flatly. "And with your debts in Boston, I doubt any judge will go easy." As the riders hauled the men away, silence returned to the clearing. Jeb lowered his rifle slowly, turning to find Abigail still gripping the poker, chest heaving. Their eyes met, his filled with pride, hers shimmering with the courage she had never known lived inside her. Emma broke the silence first, darting forward to throw her arms around Abby's waist. "I knew you'd stay, Mama Abby. I knew you were strong." Jeb's hand brushed Abigail's shoulder, steady and warm. "You stood with me," he said quietly. "I'll never forget that." In that moment, no laughter, no scorn, no cruel whisper from the town could touch them. The mountain had tested their bond, and together they had stood unshaken. Winter crept down from the peaks, frosting the pines and glazing the creek in ice. Inside the Morrison cabin, firelight painted the walls gold. The danger had passed, but the echoes of that night lingered in the way Jeb and Abby now looked at each other, not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners who had faced the storm together. Abigail sat at the table, mending one of Emma's dresses. The girl hummed by the hearth, braiding scraps of yarn into a doll's hair. Jeb entered quietly, shaking the snow from his coat, and for a moment he paused, taking in the sight. His home was no longer empty. It was alive. He crossed the room, setting a hand gently on Abby's shoulder. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and the silence between them was full, not with doubt, but with something steady, something rare. "You're safe here," he said simply. "This is your home now, if you'll have it." Abigail's lips trembled. For years she had been nothing more than a burden in others' eyes, a woman mocked, discarded, forgotten. Yet here, in the fire's glow, she was wanted, not despite who she was, but because of it. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, Jeb, I'll have it." Emma squealed and rushed to hug them both, her laughter rising like bells in the warm cabin. Outside, the mountains loomed dark and vast, the world still filled with hardship and whispers. But within these walls there was light, there was warmth, and there was the fragile, growing promise of love. And though the frontier would test them again, one question lingered in the quiet night. Would this love be strong enough to face all the shadows waiting beyond their door? Stories like Abby and Jeb's remind us that love isn't always born in grand gestures or perfect appearances. It grows in the small acts of kindness, in standing together when the world would rather see you fall apart. Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded how deeply connection matters, no matter where we live or who we are. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your voice matters here. And if you still believe in love that defies mockery and hardship, stay with us. The next story may be the one written just for you.